Here's a little extra credit with the quad anchor. When I was first taught the quad, I was taught that it was most appropriate for 2 solid bolts. Now, the quad is being taught that it can be used on more than 2 bolts and also on traditional climbing gear such as cams. If I'm going to tie the quad on more than 2 bolts, one of the things I need to recognize is that out of the 2 legs of my quad, one of the legs is going to have 2 bolts. Now, if all 3 of my bolts, in this case that I have here, appear to be of equal strength, I can just take 2 bolts that are relatively close to each other and tie put my knot up next to the one carabiner, get that other end in there, distribute it relatively well, put it in my overhand on one side, and then put an overhand on the other side for that 3rd bolt. Here's where I might have to do a little bit of adjustment to get things to work out. So I might have to push a little strand through here to get that to be relatively evenly distributed. I might have to adjust my knots a little bit to get them where I want. But there I've got a 3-piece quad. Now, if I'm concerned that maybe one of my bolts or anchor points is not of the same strength as the others, so maybe, for example, you're at an anchor and you've got 2 newer bolts and then 1 bolt that clearly looks older, or maybe it's more rusted. Like, for example, I put this cold shut hanger on the wall. That's where I'm going to want that 2 anchor points. And the reason being, as I'll show here in a moment, is that if that's the piece of gear that I'm most concerned about, you're effectively like backing it up. So here now I've built my quad, and one leg has these 2 bolts on it, and one leg has this bolt. If this was my bolt that I was most concerned about, it's essentially like backed up. So if I'm loading this anchor here, half of my load is going on each of these anchor points. Here, I can cinch that up a little bit better. The other half is all on this 1 bolt. So hence, if this is the bolt that I'm worried about, it's only getting 25% of the load in a best case scenario, hypothetical world, and this bolt is getting 25%, essentially backing that up in a way, and then this bolt's getting 50% of the load. So that's one way then, and I could even, if I had a 4th bolt, I could also put that 4th bolt in. As you get into more than 2 bolt anchors with the quad, you start to really want a long cord. I actually sometimes purposely carry long cords, like 24 feet or so, for this express reason, because it can come in handy. If you're using traditional gear, okay, like cams, can be totally appropriate to use a quad, particularly like if we're doing multi-pitch, this can be a great scenario. But when I think about where I'm going to put 2 pieces on that leg, I'm going to put the 2 pieces where I've got smaller gear, if that's a consideration. I wouldn't want to put the leg with 2 strands on the 2 biggest pieces of gear and have this small piece of gear over here. If I had this small piece of gear here, that's where I'd want to put that double strand. So those are some things to consider with the quad. Again, that's a little extra credit, but it certainly can come in handy as you're building anchors out there.